Hola, buen dia. It's me, Peppermint. And when I'm not on RuPaul's Drag Race or simply being New York City's sweetest diva, I'm tuned into the fabulously empowering Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you every weeknight at 7 p.m. live from our good old friends at the BRCSJ Virtual HQ via their Facebook page. Tune in tonight.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour. Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour.
Good evening to our friends on the East Coast. Good afternoon to our friends in the West, and good in-between time to our friends in those in-between spaces. Welcome, 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 my friends. Welcome to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters of our Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. My name is Robert C. the Schreiber. I'm the chief activist here at the center and your host for this evening, as I have been for the past year and 8 months. We've been doing this Power Hour every single freaking weeknight since the pandemic started. Over 400 some odd shows, many of them very odd indeed. And that's why we've chosen on these Thursdays to give you Throwback Thursdays, to bring back some incredibly extraordinary folks who have dropped by our little Power Hour and made such an impression on our community and been so supportive and so wonderful. So tonight is no exception. Tonight exactly proves the rule, as they say. April Rain, hashtag Oscars So White, hashtag Rainy Day Jobs, co-founder of Sister SCOTUS, using black girl magic to save the country by getting the first black woman appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, Sephora Equity Advisor, diversity and inclusion advocate, cultural commentator, hashtag She Will Rise, and she will rise indeed. And we all rose because of her appearance on the Power Hour, and we're so thrilled to bring it back tonight. But before we get to that, firstly, I want to thank, my gosh, Eric Garcia was here last night, author of We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation, and what a conversation we had. What an incredible story he told and amplified the voices of oh so many others. If you missed it, please do tune in. It was really quite extraordinary. And coming up on the Power Hour, because we do want you to come back to us. As I said at the outset, we are here at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, every single freaking weeknight. Do come back to us. We are here for you. Please be here with us. And to entice you, here are just some highlights of what's coming up in the Power Hour. Denise Froman, Poets for Puerto Rico, Eric Cervini, queer historian, Amanda Jette Knox, author of Love Lives Here, the story of her transgender family, and of course David Camp, author of Sunny Days, about the children's television revolution during the 70s, brought with him Bernadette Yao from Zoom and Emilio Delgado Luis from Sesame Street. It was truly an extraordinary moment here in the Power Hour. And speaking of extraordinary moments, this is what's coming up. Raising BIPOC Queer Voices, curated by Kalisa Ray. Adam Gopnik, one of the greatest thinkers of our generation. Dr. Peniel Joseph, Black Power scholar, author of The Sword and the Shield, will be back with us on the eve of the paperback release of that incredible book. Also, by the way, Peniel honors us by being our Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Board Vice President. Jonathan I will be here to talk about the upcoming Ali documentary on PBS that he did with Ken Burns. Jim Henson's birthday is coming up. Who better celebrate than the author of Jim Henson, the biography, Brian J. Jones? Don't miss that one, my friends. And Black Boy Joy, Kwame Umbelia. Please be here for that important moment. All those things are coming up more. There's just some highlights, my friends. But tonight, we welcome back our good friend, our stalwart ally, inspiration to us all, April Rain. Please enjoy this meaningful conversation We so enjoyed it when it was first aired, and we want to air it again. So those of you that missed it the first time can catch it now, and those of you that saw it the first time can catch all the subtle nuances. Enjoy, my friends. Enjoy. Much love and respect. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here tonight to welcome Ms. April Rain. April, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. You started sort of with Prince, so I'm very excited already.
I did. You know why? Because my lovely bride all day has been going, April Rain, April Rain.
Not the first time I've heard that, yes.
Yeah, I know, but that's why. I was infected, not with Corona, but with Prince, which is not a bad thing at all.
Not a bad. I would directly shoot Prince into my veins if I could.
Let's aspire to that. So thank you, April Rain, for being with us tonight. You are, and I know that I often speak hyperbolically, but in this case, it's absolute truth. You did something, and most folks probably know, and there may be some folks who don't, but you did something that was extraordinary. Is that you were sitting, and I want you to tell a story, so I'm just assuming things. You were involved somehow in looking at what the Oscars had become or were not becoming, and instead of grousing about it, complaining about it, being upset about it, and going to the kitchen making a cheese sandwich or a non-dairy equivalent thereof, you did something extraordinary, which, no exaggeration, no doubt, no diggity, literally changed an industry. You did that. So tell people how that evolved, what that was.
You know, you've set it up, so you've got it. I'm going to bring it way down to where you can't even see it anymore. So I would love to say that there's a really sexy story that, I was with my people, and, obviously this was in 2015, so people were still meeting face to face. And so we were, ideating and strategizing about what to do about the lack of diversity and inclusion in the entertainment industry. But no, I was half naked in my family room. When all of this took off. So at the time, January of 2015, I was still a practicing attorney. And but I was also an avid moviegoer, and that was really my only significant connection to the entertainment industry at that time. I love going to movies, like I'm sure many of your watchers do as well. And so the Oscars were special because, at that time, and probably still, they're considered the pinnacle of film. Now, we can definitely have a robust conversation about whether that is true and whether we should allow that to be true, but it was definitely so in 2015. So I was watching the Oscar nominations that morning as I was getting ready for work. And one of the presenters in 2015 was Chris Hemsworth, who plays Thor in the Marvel Avengers series, right? And so I thought, well, hey, it's Thor in a suit. And so I need him on the biggest TV we have, which is in the family room. And I definitely need him in HD so Thor and I can have this visual, moment through the screen. And so I was getting dressed in my family room as I was listening to the Oscar nominations that morning. So I'm listening, and category after category: Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, and even categories behind the camera: Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Sound Editing. There were no people of color nominated for any of the acting categories. And for those categories behind the scenes, behind the camera, they were very male-centric. So no women were nominated for Best Director and so on. So I picked up my phone and got on social media. We can talk about the efficacy of social media. And I tweeted one thing: Oscars so white, they asked to touch my hair. And that was it. And then I finished, putting on my skirt and going on to work, and I was being, petty and sarcastic and flippant, as I am all the time. And so I didn't think anything of it. I checked in on Twitter around lunchtime, and based on that one tweet, Oscar So White was trending around the world. That's it. And then, as you can imagine, I was being sarcastic. And so people, understood what I was saying, basically, although we had to have much longer conversations, obviously, about, the fact that it's not just race, it's also gender and sexual orientation and disability and First Nation status and geography and age and all of those things, right? It's a huge umbrella. But at that time, people were picking up on it and running with it just as sarcastically, I'm not sure that's a word, as I was. So it was Oscar So White, they have a perfect credit score. Oscar So White, they wear Birkenstocks in the wintertime. Oscar So White, they find mayonnaise a little spicy. The idea, right? So it wasn't until a couple of days later when we had to have the conversation about how white are the Oscars. And in fact, Snow White, like copy paper white, like liquid paper on copy paper white. Really, really bad. And so then it became up to me, again, regular moviegoer, nothing special, no, experience or training in this field at that time, to figure out, what I really wanted to say, and whether this one moment in time, whether I wanted to extend it or attempt to extend it to here we are now in year 6 having the conversation. And so I had to look into it, and find out, at that time, the Oscars, I think, were about 88, 89 years old, because this was about 6 years ago now. And in that time, they had only had, I think it was at that time, 6 women nominated for Best Director ever, and only 1 woman has ever won for Best Director. Now, we can have a huge conversation about what I think things should be, which is a meritocracy. You cast your net as wide as you possibly can. You watch the best movies there are. You nominate performances both in front of and behind the camera, and then you let the chips fall where they may, right? But what your watchers and listeners may not realize is that the Academy members, the voting members, do not have to watch the before they vote. So and what we also know is that the average person who is an Academy member is a white man in his late 50s, early 60s. So what we're now talking about is a popularity contest among films, among white men, older white men. And so, when people say, how did Denzel not, take home the Oscar for Malcolm X? Or how did Green Book win, as opposed to something else? Or how is it that we haven't had more women represented, more Latinx people represented? All those questions. You got to remember who the audience is, right? There's a reason why, if you think about it, there's a reason why every single year when award season starts, which means November or December, we have a war movie every year. In 2019, it was 1917, and so on and so forth further back, right? And that's because white men love to blow shit up. I'm sorry. I don't know. Can we curse?
You can say whatever the fuck you want.
Okay. Well, I hope my mother isn't watching that. But white men love to, carry guns and run around and shoot things and kill things and feel better about themselves. And so that's what they gravitate toward. Every year, I think it's the Hollywood Reporter, one of the trade publications in the entertainment industry, does an interview with an anonymous Oscar voter. So someone who has voted, and they ask him, well, how did you choose what you chose? And because it's anonymous, these people are very honest. And again, it's typically, an older white man, because that's what the majority of the Academy is. And they will say things like, well, I didn't watch 12 Years a Slave because I couldn't pronounce Lupita Nyong'o. Or I couldn't connect with Hair Love, which just won the Best Animated Short in 2020, Matthew Cherry's film about a father doing his daughter's hair in the morning. He couldn't connect with that. So he voted for the animated short in which a dog is sitting outside the home and has an interaction with a cat who's walking by. So he can connect with the animals, but he can't connect with a father doing his daughter's hair, and the father and daughter just happen to be Black, right? And so those are some of the issues that continually come up that I try to discuss when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and representation and equity and the distinctions between those words, but specifically in the entertainment industry, not just in front of the camera, but also behind the camera. So, for example, film critics are incredibly important, right? And it used to be, I'm of the age that, we had Siskel and Ebert, right? And they would come on every weekend and give their 2 thumbs up or down, about particular films. And I mean, that mattered. If you didn't get the 2 thumbs up from Siskel and Ebert, you might as well just close the door and go home, because nobody was going to see your movie because you didn't get this, stamp of approval. Well, they were older white guys, right? And the majority of film critics are older white guys. Let me tell you why that matters. If I go see a film like Girls Trip, I, as a Black woman, am going to have a completely different experience than if you go to see Girls Trip, or an older white man goes to see Girls Trip, or a white woman goes to see Girls Trip. That's not bigotry or racism or discrimination or any of those words that, confuse people and make them angry. That's just what we bring to an experience. And so should a person who doesn't have any background in that particular experience or culture be the person reviewing that film and telling others whether they should go see it or not? And so that's why it's important that we have stuff like the African American Film Critics Association and others, so that we can just equalize the process a little bit. And it's great that we have things like Rotten Tomatoes, and we have, people of color working for Rotten Tomatoes so that they can say, here are some diverse experiences. I see Stephanie in the comments saying, I would like more transgender women of color movies. Yes, all the time. Would love. Right? And let's talk about the fact that here we are in 2020, and we have never had a romantic comedy with 2 people from the LGBT plus community. Right? And why is that? Like, gay people fall in love, and because romantic comedies, the arc is always the same, right? 2 people meet serendipitously, they immediately fall in love, and then there's some kind of drama, and they break up, and at the end they get back together. Well, lesbians can do that. That doesn't have to be, the corner of just straight people doing that. We screw up just like everybody else does. So why don't we have more LGBT plus characters in film, and more LGBT plus people working behind the scenes? Because I've always said it's who is telling the story and whose story is being told, right? So, the most recent example I can think of off the top of my head is Green Book. Green Book was written by the son of the chauffeur. Now, yes, I'm sure he had an important story, but it was supposed to be Dr. Shelley's story, right? This piano virtuoso who's traveling through the South and, rediscovering himself and his people and all of that. And we didn't get that because we didn't have that point of view based on who was telling the story, right? So whose story was being told? The chauffeurs. We saw more about him and his little white tank top, in the air-conditioned room drinking than we did about what was going on with Shelley. And that's the type of issue that we need to address more and more as consumers, as movie goers, right? I like to think that I'm pretty awesome, but I'm definitely not unique. And so the things that I have been saying over the past 5 years now with Oscar So White are not things that have never been said before. It was just the right place at the right time with the right message. But I stand on the shoulders of Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and everyone who has been saying, no, it shouldn't be this way. It should be another way. And what are we going to do to fix it?
So, there's so many threads I want to pull at this, and I just want to kind of push them all through so we can try to address it. One of the things I do want to get to at some point is that you recently turned 50. So did I. I want to talk about that journey and how magnificent we both looked.
That's right.
I didn't get to be in essence, of course, but maybe, but I think that you discount yourself. I think you don't give yourself enough credit in that, yes, this was a dialogue that was ripe, that people needed to have. It was at the breaking point. You were the one to find the right language, but that right language is imperative. Someone else writing a different, even like one word, differently doesn't capture the zeitgeist. And that's not, and often the term the zeitgeist is derogatory. But in this case, it was a very positive thing. And what I really dig about it is that you have carried it through. And you made it a mission. And it's a really important one. And what's wonderful is, again, many other people would look at it with tunnel vision or say, okay, this is my community. I'm speaking up for my community. But what you have done by the very statement you just made so eloquently is that you want to bring everybody to the party. And that's the important part. And it's not about...
I think that part is crucial. And to be honest with you, I wasn't always sure that it was my place to do so, right? So as a straight, able-bodied Black woman, it wasn't clear to me that it was my place to advocate on behalf of the LGBT plus community or the disabled community, or to any community to which I did not belong. So what I said was, I'm going to make the umbrella as wide as I possibly can and bring in as many people as I can. And as soon as someone says, okay, we appreciate you, we got it, we're going to take it, from here with respect to this particular community, great. I'm happy to amplify and work with you or, corroborate whatever I can do. But that's just one less thing that I have to do. It's unfortunate that in 5 years that we've been talking about Oscar so late, there have been a lot of people to step up. And so the work continues on behalf of everybody, because everybody needs their stories told.
Right. I mean, it was what we had, I don't know if you know Tre'vell Anderson on a few weeks ago.
Love him. Yes.
So we were talking, and what they said was to pass the mic, because we're talking about privilege, and you just talked about it a bit yourself. How do we advocate, be an ally to others, but make sure that we're not telling their stories because we don't have that right. But how do we pass the mic to allow any community to tell their own stories? And again, that's why it's spot on. That's why it's working so well. What you're doing is that you have that realization first and foremost. Hey, I'll start the process, but the moment that someone from that community wants to, is able to, can find the platform, go for it.
Right. And in fact, I actually use different terminology now. I am past ally and I use advocate. And Brittany Packneck Cunningham, who I don't think she has been on your show, but would be wonderful on the show, actually has gone beyond me, beyond advocate to co-conspirator. So the distinction that I'm making right now is an ally is passive. That is the person who recognizes that there is something wrong. Oh my God, you're being oppressed. What are we going to do? Right? The advocate is the person who recognizes the oppression or the issue, and uses their privilege to stand in the gap on behalf of the marginalized. So the ally is passive, the advocate is active. So that's the distinction that I try to make. And so I try to be an advocate. The ally is, the pink pussy hats and the safety pin and the demonstrative stuff. Give me my gold star and my cookie because I came out here and marched or whatever for somebody else. But what are you doing after the march, right? Are you going back to those PTA meetings and saying, hey, we need to make sure that all the kids have internet access, not just our little kids in the suburbs, those kind of things. What are you doing when the cameras aren't rolling? That's the advocate, and that's the person that I try to be on behalf of marginalized communities, especially those to which I don't belong. Well,
so I mean that's why you're here. I mean, It's wonderful you have 70 million Twitter followers and all that, whatever they're called, and that's great, and that means something. But the reason that I wanted to talk to you was that you do that. You do go beyond, and it's something that I'm struggling with. That I want to be able to use my privilege to the best of its ability. That's what my parents taught me, and it's a struggle because I always look for that line of where am I overstepping? This is where I'm not welcome. This is where my voice, my privilege is not helpful, but where do I find that I can go far enough that I can make a difference?
It's a constant struggle. You just have to make sure, like Travell says, that you're passing the mic, that your voice is not the loudest voice in the room, that you're always amplifying the most marginalized around you, and you're doing what you can behind the scenes because it needs to be done, not because you're looking for any type of reward on the other side, right? And we struggle with that, so it's reading more, it's listening more, it's, not asking, marginalized folks for free labor by any means, but ensuring that you're just, that you're there, physically, emotionally, spiritually, so that they know that they can depend on you. And that, again, you are standing in the gap, that you are ensuring that you are using your privilege on behalf of other people so that they can go around you. The example that I like to use is Bree Newsom, who several years ago now scaled the flagpole, at the South Carolina State House and took down that flag, right? Now, while she was doing that, the person who taught her how to climb stood at the base of the flagpole. He was a white man. You know his name? No.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Right? But that's the point. Because he wasn't the focus for that particular day, but he was an advocate. He literally put, and I'm not saying you have to do this at all times by any means, but he literally put his body in harm's way because he knew the cops that had surrounded that flagpole were not going to agree if his white body was standing there. And so she was able to, to climb the flagpole, take the flag down, and do what she needed to do while he was being an advocate on the ground. So that's what we need to be. We've got to be the advocate on the ground, putting ourselves in harm's way for others.
You are phenomenal. So can we get a little personal? Do you mind getting a little personal?
No,
I would love to hear what it meant to you growing up and not seeing yourself on the screen, not being represented, whether, and I tell this story maybe too often, but it's a perfect microcosm. A couple of months ago, there was a Spider-Man comic, and Spider-Man was fighting Doc Ock, and they were fighting through multiple panels, and it was wonderful. And all these couples having dinner, and there was, the couples we usually see, and then there was two women who were holding hands and at a table, and there was no, word balloon, there was no caption, it was not like, look, lesbians, but it was just there quietly as they moved through the comic.
Yeah.
And it so moved me because I thought, gosh, there it is, there's representation, and some kids are going to see that, and some adults and some seniors are going to see that, some parents of kids are going to see that and say, there I am. And that's what it means. So can you tell us a little bit about, as you were growing up, what it meant to you to see folks like yourself on various screens, represented in print, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, as you said, I just turned 50. So I was born in 1970. So there wasn't a whole bunch, and as I talk about in the book that you're going to be discussing on Wednesday, Sunny Days, one of the first people that I identified with as a child was Roosevelt Franklin, the Muppet from Sesame Street, who a lot of your, watchers probably don't even know because his character was phased out because he was too black. And he was purple, literally purple. But, so that was an issue. But it was clear to me that he was black like me, you know, and he had a single mom, and I had a 2-parent household, but you know, he was one of the first characters that I recognized myself, you know, just the cadence, and he was always singing and rhyming and laughing and, you know, jovial. You know, and then there were other shows like, you know, Good Times and the Jeffersons, and they, you know, we grew up probably lower middle class. You know, so some of that was not my experience, but it was just great to see the faces on the screen, you know. And then, of course, when you go get your hair done, you know, there's the Ebony and the Essence and the Jet magazines, which was wonderful because you've got these, you know, black faces of all shades staring back at you. You know, Billy D. Williams in Empire Strikes Back. What was that, like 1980 or something? So I was about 10, somewhere around there. I know Star Wars was 77. You know, and he was the coolest thing in the galaxy, right? With the cape and the suave, and, you know, and he had Princess Leia hanging on to his every word, even though she knew that he was kind of, you know, a bad guy somehow. You know, he was super cool. And then finding out that James Earl Jones, a black man, was the voice of you know, of Darth Vader, that was super cool. So, you know, it was little things like that. But the fact that I can, you know, give them all to you is a problem, you know, because people of color have never been the default. And so, you know, we can name things on one hand or maybe two of, you know, significant moments for us with respect to culture when we felt seen. And, you know, and thankfully things have changed quite a bit in the last 50 years, you know, and I think that especially in the last 10 or 15 with the advent of digital media, with Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime, and the fact that we can, creators can get things to market faster and more cheaply than putting something up on a big screen. You know, people don't think about it. It costs a lot of money, not just to make a movie, but to get that movie into theaters. And so it's cheaper very often to get a movie onto a digital service like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime and all the rest of them. And so, you know, there's initially backlash from some of the more of the established, meaning older whites, people in the industry who didn't like the idea of Netflix, you know, winning awards and, you know, movies debuting on Netflix and not being in the theater first and all the rest of that stuff. But it feels like digital media is, it helps to level the playing ground for marginalized creatives. You know, you think about, I mean, Issa Rae started on YouTube, right? I mean, she is the best example. And now she has a, you know, multi-whatever deal with HBO, and her show has been on for years, and, you know, and she literally started from YouTube. And so that just shows the power of the different types of digital media and social media, and how for marginalized folks, you know, we have always found a way to get our culture through the zeitgeist, I think.
How do you deal with folks who say, gosh, you know, it's all about talent. It's not about color. It's not about ethnicity. It's not about gender. It's not about identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nonsense. But how do you approach and have that conversation? Can you have that conversation in an intelligent, open fashion? Is there ever a moment for that?
For sure. And I agree. It is all about talent. But where are you looking to find your talent? That's the question that I relay back to them. Right. And it's interesting. So, you know, I've got examples for everything, and, you know, and I'm very pop culture, you know, Generation X. So my example for this is, okay, here's the premise of the movie. Okay. A group of close friends get together for a raucous weekend and hijinks ensue. Okay. That's the one sentence tagline. Okay. If the group of friends is white men, that movie is called Hangover. If the group of friends is white women, that movie is called Bridesmaids. If the group of women is black women, the group of friends is black women, that movie is called Girls Trip. But only Girls Trip is pigeonholed as a black film. right? No one calls Hangover a white film. Nobody calls, Bridesmaids a white women film, although they may call it a chick flick. But if you like Hangover, right, if you like that premise, then have you seen the other two, right? And so that's the conversation that I have. How much are you opening your mind to experiences that don't look like yours? How uncomfortable are you willing to be? And why is it uncomfortable for you to watch that film when you've admitted that you love the premise? So those are the conversations that I have. Yes, it absolutely should be based on talent, but are you casting your net wide enough to ensure that you've got the most talented people in the room? And that goes for in front of and behind the camera, right? The writers, the directors, the actors, the actresses, And so I take issue with the fact when, Eddie Redmayne several years ago played a trans woman in The Danish Girl, right? And of course, this was before Pose. And so apparently it was during Pose that people realized that trans women existed, right? But why is it that a trans woman was not brought in to play that character? Because it would directly speak to her experience. Not to say that he didn't do a good job, but if you've got somebody that's closer to that experience, then they're going to be able to pull from something, right? That's what they ask actors to do, pull from deep inside and, do the method acting thing and, and really dig deep. We want you to lose 50 pounds or gain 20 pounds or whatever. If you're asking actors to do that, then why don't you get someone who is as close to that experience as possible? So yes, it should be based on talent, but you've got to ensure that you're casting your net as wide as possible so that you have the most talented in the room, that's the most talented white folks in the room.
Right. I mean, it's something that we often face when we do diversity training. One of the things we talk about is identity and terminology, and we bring up the term cisgender. And there are many people in the room who have not heard of the term, now more than there were, and they get uncomfortable. Salute.
Thank you.
They get uncomfortable, right? And they're like, why do I need to refer to myself as cis? And we're like, well, if you don't create a term for this section, for this identity, then trans folks are the other. Right. So what you're saying directly relates to that. So all communities have this type of, we don't want to be the other. We want to just be part of the community as a whole. So if there's transgender folks, there are cisgender folks. If there's Bridesmaids and The Hangover, then there's Girls Trip, and they're all the same movie. And we can't say this is a black movie and without saying this is a white movie.
Exactly. And it's about normalizing experiences. That's all it is. You mentioned it. I remember, early on in the show Black Lightning, the father and mother were talking, and they said, well, where is, oldest daughter? I can't remember what her name is. Where is oldest daughter tonight? And they said, oh, she's spending the night at her girlfriend's house. And they were like, oh, okay, and what's for dinner, right? And that was it. That one sentence told me, that, oh, okay, their daughter is, queer. I don't know if she's bisexual, lesbian, or whatever, but, she's got a woman partner right now. And that's it. And that's the normalization that we want, right? That, and again, another example, why is it that, Professor Xavier in the X-Men series, who is wonderfully played by Sir Patrick Stewart, and I love him to death, right? But he's not a disabled man, right? And Professor X is in that chair, in that wheelchair. So why don't we have a person who uses a wheelchair play a superhero? Why have we never seen a disabled person play a superhero? Because we've got this disabled person as a character, so that's normalized, right? Nobody ever asked, is he going to try a new surgery so that he can walk? And no, this is who he is in this chair. And that is normalized without any problem, without any question whatsoever. You think about it, when John Boyega was announced as one of the stormtroopers, right? Reddit went bananas. How could you possibly have, a black man as a stormtrooper? It's like, okay, so you're telling me you can believe in Jar Jar Binks, but you can't believe in a stormtrooper? Like, we can have Ewoks and Tauntauns and all the rest, in the galaxy far, far away. but a black stormtrooper is enough for you to want to, burn your little action figures. Is that really where we are? Right?
Well,
So
yeah.
it really is about normalizing, and it's imperative that all of us speak up, especially when, again, advocacy, when it's not part of our group, right? So I'm speaking up on behalf of the LGBT plus community, even though that's not my community. But I can absolutely say, why haven't we had a queer rom-com in 2020, right? Because that helps to normalize. It cannot be the burden of the oppressed to attempt to change the structure that has oppressed it from the beginning, right? And that's why it's imperative that we have advocates and allies and co-conspirators who look like the people who are in power, because we all gravitate toward, listen to more people who look like us, who share, or at least who we think share, our values and commonalities and all the rest of that stuff, right? So we need more, Mark Ruffalo's and Chris Evans and all the white guys and, in the Marvel who we love, to speak up, right? And that's why it's great. Mark Ruffalo, his big thing is the environment, and that's fantastic. Mark Ruffalo has more money than Jesus, right? He can live wherever he wants to live for the rest of his life. And, plastic straws and saving the planet, none of that is ever going to affect him in that way. And so for him to use his voice as loudly and as strongly as he does makes a difference, because he looks like the CEOs of all of the oil companies that could make changes if they wanted to.
So boots in the ground. Like when people bugged out, the same example when Donald Glover was talking about playing Spider-Man, right? How do we, starting as allies, moving up to advocates, and then becoming co-conspirators, how do we, boots in the ground, make a difference? What can we do? Can you help us? Because you've done it. You've done it. You've been doing it for years. It must have been a moment for you when Spike Lee said he didn't think he would have gotten his Oscar without the work you did.
That was a moment.
Yeah, that was a moment. And you deserved it.
Thank you.
And how do we all aspire to that? What can we do? Because it's great to talk in platitudes and ideals, but what can we do concretely if we're not Mark Ruffalo?
Yeah.
But we're, whether we have a little, broadcast we do every night, or where we have a Twitter feed that attracts, a couple 100,000 folks, and everything in between. What can we really do together?
Yeah. I think first you have to decide that you want to, right? Because you have to be committed to it. It's not a sometimey thing. I'm going to be an advocate 3 times a week, right? And I absolutely, work-life balance, and you got to get social justice in there, and you also have to eat and sleep, right? And so everything is a balance. So you have to decide what percentage of that pie this is going to be. And then you truly have to decide, I in my mind, and I am definitely not the expert on any of this. I am learning as I go, just like everybody else. But I think you have to decide what your issue is, right? Because maybe it's environmental issues, maybe it's mass incarceration, maybe it's diversity and inclusion, and representation. I don't know that you can do all of those things well. So you put your boots on the ground where it moves your soul, right? Where you really want to make that change. And then I think that you conspire, collaborate, get with whatever phrase you want to use with like-minded folks, and start learning and start reading, until you feel like you're a subject matter expert, until you can start rattling off the numbers and the percentages of whatever that issue is, right? The number of, how many prisons are being affected by coronavirus right now, and how many formerly incarcerated folks, just got their right to vote back in Florida, those kind of things. If mass incarceration is your thing, whatever that is, and then I think you read, you learn, you talk, you speak, you communicate. I think, hashtags come and go every hour, every day. I think that Oscar So White has had its staying power because I took it offline. And I've been very clear from the beginning that Oscar So White could not have happened on any other social media platform. It could not have happened on, Instagram and Facebook or any of the rest of them. It had to be Twitter based on the type of conversation that I needed to have. And I don't get it because I am completely obsessed with Twitter. Hi, my name is April. I am obsessed with Twitter. But there are people that are not on Twitter that you need to reach, right? The president of the academy, or the CEOs of movie studios may not have Twitter accounts. So how do I reach them, right? How do I get my message across? Well, I start to write. And that's where my training as a lawyer comes in. I write well, I speak well, I think, and I can take very complex subjects and boil them down into a hashtag, or, at least into something easily digestible for people, so that I'm not talking up here, I'm talking where people are. I believe in meeting people where they are, not talking above them. And so, I think you have to write, speak, meet people where they are, go to them and provide your message. And I think that's how you do it. And there's obviously different kinds of advocacy, right? There are people who are out in the streets marching, the March for Black Lives and Freddie Gray and for immigration and mass incarceration. And then there are people who do stuff online, and can, coalesce folks and get their followers together in that way. There are people who write op-eds, and it all is necessary. It's all part of the movement. So don't let anybody ever tell you, oh, well, you weren't out in the streets, so you're not a real whatever, because that's not true, because it all goes toward, goes down that road of justice together, whatever justice looks like for you.
I love that. Whatever justice looks like to you. I like that very much. Did you, once you saw this taking off, and what was the timeline for you? Like, I know that day, I know that with Twitter, it's quick. It's, it's up to, 10,000, 100,000, et cetera, et cetera. When did you know that it was something that was going to be now not your life mission per se, but your mission for the moment? When was that crystallized for you?
I'm not sure that I don't think that I could point to one particular moment. I can tell you that when I got an interview request from New Zealand, I'm not sure that I can pick out New Zealand out, on a map, but apparently they had heard of this little hashtag and were interested in talking to me about it. That's when I knew that this thing, whatever it was, had legs. And so I needed to do something, right? And as I spoke, earlier, figure out what this thing is, where I can take it, what it can be. And at some point along there, Marie Kondo, the organizer extraordinaire, she talks about sparking joy, right? And so when I started having these conversations about diversity and inclusion and representation of marginalized people in the entertainment industry, something inside me, my joy was sparked. Something inside me became alive in a way that I had never, in a way that I had not felt in at least 15 years, like at least since college, right? I did some advocacy work when I was in college, and so I was trying to figure out if that was it. And that, it was the same type of spark, right? Standing up for marginalized folks. And so I had not felt that same spark since then. And so then I said, oh, okay, I love this. I can feel my passion burning for this. What do I do, right? Because I'm still a practicing attorney, so I'm sitting at a desk, and I'm wearing, attorney type clothes, and I'm trying to keep this, 40 or 50 hour a week job. And I've got 2 kids at home, and all I want to do is be on the computer all day, or writing something in the Washington Post or whatever, because that is what's giving me my joy. And so at some point I had to have a conversation with my husband and say, hey, what do you think about me traveling more, making less money, and probably not being around as much? How's that sound? And to his credit, he said, I can see it, he gave me a parachute of love and said, jump. And that was, and so I had that support. I also know that if my kids had been 10 years younger than they are, I couldn't have done this because I would not have wanted to be away from them as much as I am now. My kids are now 16 and 20. I think that they were around, 11 and 16 at the time, and so they were right there in the middle of teenager dumb, and dumb I use intentionally, or almost there. And so they were relatively self-sufficient, and it was not as much of a burden on my husband for me to be gone more, for him to, help take care of the kids, that kind of thing. Right. And so that was, so everything was just aligned for me. Here I am finding my passion, starting an entirely new career from scratch at age 44. I don't necessarily recommend it. If you can find your passion at half my age, I absolutely suggest that. And so, when I go to talk to colleges and universities around the country, I say, figure out what that thing is that sparks your joy. Figure it out now. And maybe it's not that thing that your parents told you to do. Maybe it's not the degree that you're currently trying to earn, right? But there will always be this gnawing in you, so if you are, studying chemical engineering, but that you want to be a poet, there is going to be a disconnect there. And so when is it that you start living for yourself, right? Because I truly believe that if you are doing work that you love, that you will do it almost for free, never work for free, but, almost for free. And that you will work harder at it, and that the money and the accolades or whatever it is that you need, will come. But if you're doing something, as I was, to be very honest, that pays the mortgage and is very safe and, and very lucrative, but kills your soul from the inside out, and that's the way it felt when I was practicing, there will be a void in your life, and and whether it's conscious or subconscious, you will always be attempting to fill that void.
I want to just pull up the thread, just because I think it's so important that you have this wonderful partner in your life who supported you in doing this.
Please excuse my dog.
That's okay. I thought it was me.
Apparently we're getting a delivery. No, that's the only thing that intrigues her. It's from the Amazon guy.
I think it's wonderful. I mean, I too have such a supportive partner who allows me to do this work, and every night I'm doing this show, and that wouldn't be possible without her support either. So I know, and I hope our community understands, when we do this kind of work, it's so important to have a family and a support system behind us.
For sure. And that doesn't mean that you have to be, partnered up with somebody, but have a tribe, right? Have a community that you can rely on and depend on, and talk you through it when, you're thinking, should I quit this job? Should I take this leap of faith? Does this make sense? Because your true friends, your homies, your community, whatever you call it, are the ones that are going to say, I see the light in you that I didn't see before. So yeah, you should do it, and if you need to come, sleep on my couch for a couple of weeks or whatever the case may be, you can do that. But you have to have that safety net of community, whether it's a married partner or, somebody else, your parents, whatever you've got. But it's crucial. It's key. There's no way that I could do the things that I do without that community. And in fact, a lot of my closest friends now are folks that I found on Twitter, that we became Twitter friends first, and then we met in real life. And now, we're inseparable in that sense, even though none of them live in my city.
So that's my next question is, so you decided to do this, you had the support of your family. Did you then gather a tribe? Did you then say, okay, I can't be the sole voice here. I need to learn from others. I need to, if I'm going to be, stepping from ally to advocate to co-conspirator, I need to have this circle around me So when I can't answer this question about transgender issues, I know who I can go to. When I can't answer this question about this community, I can go to this person or this gathering of folks. Did you do that consciously, or did that just happen organically?
It happened organically. And it's not something that I recommend. You know, if you can get your group of people, you know, your Avengers or, you know, to assemble or what have you.
Your social justice league.
Exactly. See, perfect. Yes. You know, then that's the way that I would go. You know, in the stuff that I do is, you know, it's entertainment, right? And so all those people are, you know, celebrities and whatever and stars, and they teach at USC or whatever. And I didn't know any of those folks, right? I'm the same age or older than most of them, but I didn't have those connections. And so it came very organically, you know, as I was reading more, okay, well, who are the people in this field? Well, let me reach out to them on social media and just start a conversation. Not, you know, again, don't ask folks for free labor, not teach me everything you know about transgender issues, you know, not, you know, but just follow those people, you know, and learn from them, see how they move, see that how they react in different situations and have those conversations. And then just pick up bits and pieces along the way. And I'm still doing that. I'm in it with respect to every single community, you know, of which I'm not a part, and my own. You know, I learn stuff about Black folks all the time. You know, it wasn't, I learned on Twitter probably about 10 years ago, but I learned on Twitter that Memorial Day was actually started by Black folks. Like, you know, I didn't know that. And you know, back in when dinosaurs roamed the earth when I was in school, they definitely didn't teach that. And I know from my children that they still are not teaching that. Right. So, you know, you learn when and where you can. And I think everyone has something to learn and everyone has something to teach. Everyone. Right. And I think people discount themselves and thinking, oh, I don't have anything to contribute, you know, or I don't know anything about anything. And it's like, you do, you know, even if they're life skills, right? That everybody has something that they can teach. And everybody has something that they need to learn. And so it's really on all of us just to be more open to learning and teaching, you know, learning from others and teaching what we do know, you know, sharing what we know.
Right, and that comes from experience, and that comes from life, and that comes from who we are, not about education. And I love the fact that what you touched on also is that we should never assume or burden somebody as being the representation of one community. Nobody is representing one community. We all have diverse experiences, no matter what color, shape, size, gender, sexuality, identity, et cetera, that we are.
Right.
We all have.
And no community is a monolith either. You know, Black folks have their issues all the time. And we, you know, just the differences between, you know, political issues. You know, there are Black Republicans. I don't understand it, but they exist, and good for them. God bless them. You know, whatever. You know, we'll welcome them home when they are ready to see the light. But you know, but so, you know, no one community is a monolith, right? There are LGBT plus issues that they need to get with and figure things out, you know, terminology and who we are going to be accepting of and all the rest of that stuff too, you know. So if no community is a monolith, then clearly, you know, no individual can be a representative of something that is not as cohesive. And why should we assume that they are? Right? You know, no white person speaks on behalf, you know, you look at Trump, right? He doesn't speak on behalf of all white folks in America, I'm sure, right? And so you can't, or, you know, or not even all Black men, or morbidly obese white men, you know, as Nancy Pelosi says. So, you know, we just have to be thoughtful, you know, and sort of change our default, right? The default is always straight, able-bodied white folks. I think everybody, including straight, able-bodied white folks, need to work on changing our default. So my thing, and I know we're coming to the end of time. So my thing is, it is always my goal to uplift in my work, in the way that I walk in the world, right? Whether it's official, you know, Oscar so white, diversity, inclusion stuff, but just the way that I walk in the world it is always my goal to uplift disabled trans women of color. Okay, because that sort of checks all the boxes. That is probably the most marginalized person on this earth, right? A disabled trans woman of color. So if what I am doing is going to make her, and I keep her in my mind. And so if what I am doing is going to somehow better her life or better her community, then I know that I'm on the right path.
That's a burden to bear. That's a lot for you to take on.
Well, I don't see it as a burden. It's just, are you, it's always, are you doing this for you? Are you, who is this going to help? That's the question. Who are you helping in this instance? What, how is this going to change anything? What is the goal here? Who is going to benefit from this? Those are the questions that I'm asking. So I don't see it as a burden, but a responsibility, and they're both heavy, but a responsibility feels more positive to me because I am taking active steps to make, the world a little better for somebody else, right? So it's not just my kids, it's, my community. My community is everybody, but the most marginalized in that community is a disabled, woman of color, trans woman of color.
I know that you have to run. You're like live tweeting a Lifetime movie or something, right?
Yes. So
I'm so proud to be like the precursor to that. Mention us when you're live tweeting.
I absolutely will, and I appreciate this. Was a fantastic conversation. I know I am very much chatty, so I apologize, and I hope we got through at least some of what you wanted to.
That's why you were here. Come back.
I would love to.
All right. Thank you so much. We love you, and I know you have to run, so Prince will be disappointed. There'll be no after party tonight, but know that he loves you, and we so appreciate your time. Enjoy the live tweet, and we look forward to reading it when we get off the air.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody that was watching tonight. You guys have a great evening.
All right. We love you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was, there are some nights where you get what you think you're going to get, and there are some nights you get so much more. And I really loved the language about being an ally versus an advocate versus a co-conspirator. And I want to promise you, my community, I know I do a pretty good job as an ally, and I'd like to try to aspire to be an advocate and hopefully at some point become a co-conspirator. And that's my pledge to you from this conversation. That's the one thing that I will take from this. And I hope that all the rest of you got something as well that you can take back to your community, to your family, chosen or otherwise, to your friends, to your allies, to your advocates and your co-conspirators. We love you all so much, I tell you. Just an incredibly meaningful moment shared with April Rain, an incredible, inspirational conversation. I love, again, what she talked about, the difference between allies, advocates, and co-conspirators. Co-conspirators, my friend. May we all aspire to that. Come back to us here at the Power Hour. We are here 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, every single freaking weeknight. We are here for you. Please be here with us. Until soon, much love and respect. Please be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And most especially, my friends, be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.